This is my favorite scene in Princess Mononoke, and this is my least favorite scene in Memento. The reason I love one and not the other is Greta Gerwig, but we'll get to her. First, some poetry. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Written in 1919, William Butler Yeats' lines were a reaction to World War I. Countries colliding, corpse-lined trenches. It's no wonder Yeats thought the world was ending, and honestly the sentiment of the poem rings true today. Black and trans people murdered in a system that does not acknowledge them as people. The elderly and the immunocompromised put in danger by people who refuse to wear masks. The environment, my God, the environment deteriorating. The center isn't holding. Things feel like they are falling apart, but this is a happy video. Believe it or not, this is a happy video. Yeats more or less was saying the absence of humanity would lead to things falling apart tragically, but I want to apply Yeats's justified pessimism to a more optimistic scenario. Imagine a world not absent of humanity, but filled to the brim with love and tenderness. In that world, things would still fall apart, centers would still not hold, only it wouldn't be tragic. We'd be celebrating. I know this because I've seen those worlds, and so have many of you. They exist in Greta Gerwig's two darling, daring films, Lady Bird and Little Women. In response to a question concerning the lack of judgment placed on characters in her movies, Gerwig said this.
I'm not interested in a hierarchy of lives. I believe in grace for everyone.
A mind that strives to see value in as many people as possible is a mind bound to tell stories in which centers do not hold, and in the case of Little Women, that center is Saoirse Ronan's Jo March. It is Jo who gets the opening and closing shots of the film, Jo who delivers the awards-worthy speech, Jo who is given the inspiring writer in the attic montage with all the candles. I love the candles. Fuck a fire hazard, I love the candles. Anyways, everything about the movie screams Jo is your central protagonist, and yet it doesn't always feel that way. Amy, for example.
Amy, it's Amy.
Amy is constantly pulling our attention away from Jo, in part because Florence Pugh is stealing scenes left and right. Like some sort of actor's version of Swiper the Fox.
Swiper, no swiping!
Oh, man.
The performance is magnetic, but that magnetism wouldn't matter if Gerwig didn't see enough value in Amy's story to point the camera at her and let her story unfold. We get to see Amy go from this self-centered devil child to an artist grappling with her inability to be one of the greats, grappling with the economic realities of the world for her as a woman.
And as a woman, there's no way for me to make my own money.
We see the entire arc of who could have been a side character because Greta Gerwig didn't see her as a side character.
I'm not interested in a hierarchy of lives.
Her disinterest in a hierarchy of lives means the very idea of a central protagonist is disrupted in her work, and it's more than just cutting between two characters. There are plenty of movies with more than one central character. What makes a Gerwig film so unique is her commitment to challenging the idea of centrality by giving nearly everyone she puts on screen a chance to be the center of the movie. This scene, for example, it starts off with Marmee being the focus, then after a few interactions it moves to Meg and John. They have their chat, and then we go back to Marmee, and then all of a sudden Jo comes in and we're focusing on her. We never really get a handle on which one person we should be paying attention to, because we shouldn't be paying attention to only one person. We should be paying attention to everyone. The camera moving from person to person is Gerwig telling us every character is important, including those who aren't in the March family. For Gerwig, it's not enough to only develop the Marches. She strives to see the value in as many characters as she can, which means she'll wind up developing the characters who orbit the central family, not just the central family. The moment we think Meg's frustration with money will be the focus of a scene, we hear John express his feelings of inadequacy.
I really am very sorry that you've had to do without so many beautiful things, and that you're married to someone who can't give them to you.
We hear that, and we wonder if we were wrong to focus on one person the whole time. Then there's a moment where it seems like Beth, well, first of all, there's this idea that like, Beth's only function in the story is to be shy and die, but like she's contributing so much more than just that. She commits so hard to this hilarious pipe-smoking curmudgeon character, and she also delivers lines that hint at a dry sense of humor.
Beth, what's your favorite eye color? Purple.
I don't know why I find her saying purple so funny. Maybe it's not, but I think that the eye color line and her play acting show that Beth is imaginative and playful and deserves way more adjectives than just timid. She even says she talks to horses at one point.
I said hi to the horses before. They're very nice.
If not for Gerwig's curious and compassionate camera trying to get to know everyone, I don't know if those moments of Beth's doll-feeding whimsicality would have peeked through. Anyways, back to the piano. For a moment, it seems like Beth gaining confidence in playing Mr. Lawrence's piano is the central story of this scene, But then that center shifts visually and narratively to include Mr. Lawrence. Gerwig holds on this shot of him crying over the memory of his little girl who's passed away, and again as an audience member you're wondering, wait a minute, I thought Beth was the focus of the scene, and I thought Joe was the main character of this story. Where is she, and why am I crying over Mr. Lawrence's sadness? The reason we get this shot and sit in this shot for as long as we do is because Gerwig's need to show the value in every story allows her camera to move away from the main characters and towards those characters in the margins of the story. This scene is my favorite example. It seems like Marmee trying to help with the war is the central story, but then this guy, who is this guy? Look how he plays confusion over the situation he is in. And now listen to what he says.
You have sons in the army?
Yes, ma'am, I had 4, but 2 were killed, and 1 is a prisoner.
That man, as the Hamilton cast would say, is facing the unimaginable. During this scene, he is the center of the story. Not Marmee or the March sisters or anyone who knows the March sisters, just him and his tragedy. Even when the camera follows Marmee, we see her add a scarf to the man's bundle. An action that, to me, says, look, I know I cast movie icon Laura Dern. I know she nursed a goddamn Triceratops back to health, but for this moment, she's not the central character. He is. This man does not get those lines, does not get to tell his story if Gerwig had the kind of mind Christopher Nolan had when he shot this scene. I cringe when I see that scene because it's clear to me that Nolan did not care about who that character was. After the star of the movie knocks, there's some time where he's just waiting, and with that time, Nolan could have cut to the other side of the door. We could have learned about that character based on what he was maybe eating for lunch or watching on TV. Maybe he had a picture of his family somewhere, or maybe he wasn't a family man. Maybe he was like committing adultery or just struggling with drugs or something, anything, but no. Nolan turns a person into a prop, a punchline.
Sorry.
Simply because he isn't the star. It seems like the mentality during the shooting of that scene was the movie's not about him, so I give a shit. In that scene, Nolan did not pass the Gerwig test.
So what is the Gerwig test? It's not like the Bechdel test in that it's something you can and should pass. It's not that hard. The Gerwig test is less something you pass and more a mentality, an ideal to strive towards. As an artist, are you making an effort to recognize that everyone you put on screen has a story worth telling? And are you letting that story be told, or at least hinted at, by giving different characters, regardless of how major or minor, time to prove their humanity? Another example is Shelley in Lady Bird.
Hi.
She could have easily been a sight gag, your big brother's weird goth girlfriend, but no.
She took me in after my parents freaked out about whatever, premarital sex.
She gets time to talk about why she lives with Lady Bird's family and why she loves Lady Bird's mom.
I admire her.
Father Levaich is another example.
We're going to play first one to cry wins.
If Gerwig were more like Dorsey Nolan, I honestly believe this scene would have ended with a punchline. Something like, we see everyone trying to cry, and then we cut to him crying, and he says something like, well, I guess I won. But again, no. Gerwig cares about people too much to do that. Instead of a punchline, Gerwig makes us sit with the tears.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Just like she made us sit with Mr. Lawrence's tears. She makes us sit and recognize that this man has a life beyond being Lady Bird's theater director. Not only do we sit in his grief, but we also follow his pain. We see that the play meant more to him than we might have thought.
They didn't understand it.
And later we learn of his depression, and he straight up says he doesn't want Lady Bird to know about it.
Please don't tell your daughter.
No, of course not. Of course not.
His arc is hardly relevant to Lady Bird's story, just like the old man's story is hardly relevant to the March sisters. But their lack of relevance to the narrative at large is not used as an excuse to present them as less than human, like they would be if they were on the other side of that door in Memento. That's what the Gerwig test is all about. Challenging the idea that main characters are all that matter in a story by moving the camera away from the center and letting things fall apart for a second. Letting things fall apart to show that people in the margins are, in fact, people.
Problem is, like I said, this isn't really a test that you can actually pass, at least not without dipping into the avant-garde and experimenting with incomprehensibility like Richard Linklater did with Slacker. Gerwig herself has moments where she doesn't pass the Gerwig test. Fred Vaughn, for example, is pretty much presented as a wallet who asked to be used and was rejected. We could have cut to his reaction to getting rejected, and we could have learned more about what business he's always up to in London, but that's the problem. humanity can't be represented at its fullest through fiction. And that's not just me theorizing without some sort of basis. It's a conclusion 19th century realist authors came to when they were trying to do with novels what Greta Gerwig is doing now with film. This guy, Alex Wallach, doctorate in literature, teaches at Stanford. He's kind of a genius and maybe my favorite contemporary scholar. He noticed a trend happening in those 19th century realist novels. Authors like George Eliot, who wrote Middlemarch, which Gerwig herself has praised in many interviews.
If a book can make you be a better person, Middlemarch made me a better person.
This is why we're tying Gerwig's efforts in compassionate filmmaking to 19th century literature. Those books had a clear impact on her as a person, and it's influenced her work. But anyways, those 19th century authors were packing their books with tons and tons of characters, and they were trying to write in such a way where it seemed like each of those characters had a life beyond the confines of the book. One effect of that effort is the books became incredibly long. I have one of them, Bleak House by Charles Dickens, an 800-page juggernaut, just goes on and on with tons of characters. Very few of them are flat, which is why I love it. But along with sheer length, another effect of trying to make every character as round and as human as possible is oftentimes in those books it becomes unclear who the central character is. Writers would shift from one character to another in order to develop everyone as equally as possible, in the same way that Gerwig packs her frames with characters, has them talk over each other, and shifts our focus from one person to another in an attempt to develop everyone. The result, like we said, is an actual center never really feels completely established. It always feels like things are falling apart, and that's an aesthetic choice. It's a choice that forces viewers to care about more than just the main character, and it's a choice that also forces you as an artist to think about the lives of individuals that other stories, like Memento, would say do not matter. So what happened to those 19th century realist writers? Why hasn't their style had more of an influence? Well, they got discouraged. They found no matter how hard they tried, and they did try hard. I mean, look at this thing. This thing's huge. They tried. They found no matter how hard they tried to make everyone appear as human as possible, characters kept falling prey to fiction's sharp edges. Characters kept appearing flat. Henry James, for example, who I guess was not kind of a cutie, he said this about his writing. That's the actual quote, but I'm going to try to translate it into something understandable. He basically said, "My goal was to make each of my characters as round as possible, but I know if I were to look back at everything I wrote, I would only see how flat and inhuman each of them are. I tried and I failed." Pretty defeatist, and my theory is that people would stop trying to tell stories in which as many characters are as fully formed as possible because they saw that it couldn't happen. I mean, you move into the 20th century when movies started to become a thing, and you see how star-obsessed storytellers became. If you were in a John Wayne movie and you weren't John Wayne or John Wayne's friend, you probably weren't given the time of day. The Native American characters in Stagecoach, for example, have no lines. They just attack the central characters without having been made central themselves, which makes it easier to dislike them and watch them die. While I think Stagecoach has its merits and is still worth watching, it doesn't have to keep being made. Storytellers should learn from its shortcomings and develop the characters in the margins, not just knock them out. I think and I hope Gerwig's rising popularity is a sign that 19th century way of thinking, the idea that every character in a story has value and should be treated as such, is coming back into fashion. Only this time, instead of getting pessimistic over the fact that it's impossible to make every character appear human, we should celebrate artists like Greta Gerwig who at least put in the effort to care.
Lin-Manuel Miranda is one of those artists. In Hamilton, that rewind moment, and pretty much all of Satisfied, where Angelica gets a chance to document her perspective on the night Eliza and Alexander met, is evidence of Miranda trying to pass the Gerwig test. However, you could argue he failed it by not going into this character's life, Peggy, a little bit more. Her role is sort of a punchline in the Schuyler sisters' introduction, and that sucks. Like books have spatial constraints, shows have time constraints, and Peggy fell prey to the sharp edges of Hamilton the musical just like Fred Vaughn did in Little Woman. And that's okay.
You can't 100% pass the Gerwig test, but you can at least ace it, and I think it's important to try. Try to challenge the assumption that storytelling requires flat characters. Try to challenge the assumption that it's okay to leave characters in the margins speechless, that it's okay for a protagonist to turn a human being into a punchline. The reason I think it's important to try is because if you're going to tell a story with someone like Guy Pearce, a person people want to look like and maybe be like, if you see that hero treating someone else as less than human, then who's to say that you won't treat others as less than human too? I'm not saying that one scene in Memento is the reason why people are doing things like refusing to wear a mask, but my argument is that it is one of many drops in the bucket that affirms the mentality that says you are the main character, you are the star, and the extras around you do not matter. 12 Angry Men provides a visual for the situation. We have 11 jurors made up of scenes like the door scene in in Memento, those Bloodshots in Michael Bay movies, or even Anna Paquin's character in Noah Baumbach's The Squid in the Well. She is mostly just there to affirm how pathetic and monstrous Jeff Daniels' character is.
Put me in your mouth.
We never see her reaction to his assault, it just happens, and she disappears. Baumbach's changed, by the way. Marriage Story is definitely trying to pass the Gerwig test, and it's awesome. But anyways, we have 11 jurors who are fine with that door scene in Memento because they have glanced at the evidence and agree. It's an open and shut case. Central characters are more important than the minor ones. Let's call it a day. However, one lone juror number 8, a Greta Gerwig, a Lin-Manuel Miranda, a Jonathan Demme, they speak up and they say, wait a minute, shouldn't we have a closer look? See if there are any truths alternative to the ones we have been presented with? Maybe those minor characters aren't that minor. Maybe they have a story worth telling, and sure, we don't have the time to tell it, but shouldn't we at least allude to it? That juror, those storytellers, they are the ones who are not interested in a hierarchy of lives. They intentionally prevent the censors of their stories from holding. They intentionally let things fall apart, not because they hate people, but because they love people so much they can't fathom depicting a world in which one person is holding everything together at the expense of others. Those are the kinds of stories I want to see, and if I ever get a chance to, they are the type of stories I would like to tell because it's good to care about people, and also there's this line in the James Ponsoldt movie at the end of the tour. Jason Segel as David Foster Wallace says this thing about our relationship to media that is kind of frightening. He says, we are constantly being fed these
Images on a screen given to us by people who do not love us but want our money. Do not love us but want our money. Do not love us but want our money.
When I see this kind of filmmaking, I feel like I'm watching something from someone who would not care about me if I was in the same room as them, but they would gladly take my money, and I don't like that anymore. I prefer scenes like this. My favorite scene from Hayao Miyazaki's Princess Mononoke, where a moment of mourning is given to the minutest of extras, a piece of scenery, a plant. I prefer that because I feel like I'm watching something by someone who not only cares about me, but cares about everyone and every living thing around me. I think Roger Ebert made a mistake when he said movies are empathy machines. They certainly can be. Jonathan Demme was one of the few in the 20th century who was able to prove that with his work, but a lot of them haven't been. A lot of them have been made by people who do not care about me or you, as evidenced by the way that they treat the people in the margins of the stories that they tell, and also by the way that they treat people on set, but that's for another video. This is all just to say movies can be empathy machines, but they haven't been. They haven't been, but now the rise in storytellers like Greta Gerwig, Lin-Manuel Miranda, Ryan Coogler, Sean Baker. It seems like more and more of what is being put on screen is coming from people who genuinely are trying to hear and love people, and that is just so exciting. Please comment. The Gerwig test is a work in progress. I have a ton of issues with it that I would love to address in a future video if you're interested. If not, all good. But thanks for watching.